Okay, hi everyone, welcome. Thank you for coming along. I'm Natasha Devon and I have a show on LBC on Saturday evenings, which is sometimes referred to as the woke hour, which I find incredibly offensive because it's 2 hours and people should remember that. But when I'm not doing that, I am a mental health campaigner. I work in schools and colleges and universities throughout the world. So this is something that is really close to my heart and I'm really glad to be here today to discuss it with you. This is very much meant to be an overview conversation to get you thinking and to generate more discussion. Because everything that we're touching on probably, and we were saying this earlier, could be a whole hour-long panel in its own right. But the topic is thriving in 2024 by looking after our mental health and well-being. And hopefully you will all leave with some really practical tips and ideas about how you can do that. About MEFA, it's a media for all, that's what it stands for, and it was set up by Naren Patel, who is with us today. And its aim is to help recruit and retain people from Black, Asian and other minoritized backgrounds in the advertising industry. MEFA Matters is a platform for people from across advertising to come together to listen and to ask questions. Global is a commercial sponsor and partner of MEFA, and this event is part of Global's Get Global Talking campaign, which aims to destigmatize mental health and create a culture of openness and acceptance. Just a quick note on safeguarding before we begin. I'm hoping there won't be anything that triggers you today, but if there is, or if you need any emotional support following the panel today, then NABS, who are also here, have an advice line open to anyone in the industry. And NABS is a charity dedicated to advancing mental wellness in advertising and media. So what I'm going to do now, rather than introducing the panel, which is boring, I'm going to get you to introduce yourselves in 30 seconds, and we'll go from left to right. So starting with Lorraine.
Hi everyone, I'm Lorraine Jennings-Creed and I work at NABS. NABS is the support organisation to advance mental wellness of people in the industry. I oversee the wellbeing services, so everything that we do to help people on an individual level. And I've been at NABS for about 15 years and really thrive of really trying to help and support people with their mental health.
Hello everyone, I'm Nikki Sagal, the General Manager of Media for All. Natasha's given an overview of what MEFA is, but really this is the first time that I'm on a panel for MEFA, and it's a topic really close to my heart, mental health, because I've got lived experience and I'm for the first time speaking about it in an open forum, so that's why I'm here.
Hi, I'm Sally Pomfrey. I work at Global. My day job is Partnership Delivery Director, but I am also now co-chair of the Thrive Network, which is the mental health and wellbeing network here at Global. I am a mental health first aider here, have been trained while working at Global, and for the past 3 years been a chair on the commercial mental health board, and have a huge interest in making sure that people can thrive in the workplace and feel that they can have open conversations.
Wow, you all did it in under 30 seconds. Well done. That was very succinct. I wanted to begin with a question for all of you. Something that I learned is that racialized people, and I use the term racialized people because I like to, first of all, acknowledge that race is a social construct, but also acknowledge that people of different races experience the world in a different way, and that's a difficult line to walk. Also, just as a side note, as an atypically mixed person, if I see one more form that says black, white, or Asian, like, right, these are my choices, 2 colors that no one is, and a very diverse continent. Which one? So I'm going to use racialized people. That's just my personal choice. But racialized people are more likely to experience a severe mental health issue and less likely to see a positive outcome from treatment. That's something that we know from research done by the Mental Health Foundation. And I thought it'd be interesting to open this discussion to find out why you think that might be. And there are obviously lots and lots of reasons, but just any thoughts that you have as to why we are seeing this pattern. Does anyone want to volunteer to go first on that?
Yeah, I'll start.
Okay.
So I'm talking from a place of just doing my own research and experience as well, and also just some of the things that we, I suppose, experience in here at NABS. NABS only goes so far in terms of what it can offer. So we're not in a kind of crisis situation. We do a lot of work on the prevention side, and the things that come up for us, and that came up from our researchers as well, is just around the barriers in terms of being able to speak out. One, around identifying what is a mental health condition. I think there's a lack of knowledge around understanding what that is. Also understanding what the language that people can use around that, and then therefore how to access some safe support when you're, if you are confident enough to go and talk to your GP for help. Do you trust the system that the GP will be able to identify and support you? And then when you're onto that care, there will be potentially some further barriers, which could be, from a discriminatory point of view as well. So they can create a perpetual cycle of, well, what's the point of speaking out if I can't get the right help and the right access? So that's kind of what I've come across.
I think as a person of colour and in Black and Asian communities, mental health is often and still seen as a taboo. And I know a lot of work has been done, and there's been stuff that's filtered through the government to shine a light on mental health and how important it is to talk about it, but still within our communities, it's almost like there's a lot of shame, guilt and fear attached to speaking up about it. So I think that's why there's a barrier to lack of help, because it's firstly having that language to identify what you're feeling, and then having, taking the next steps to actually go and seek that help. And also having that fear of, what if my family find out, or how am I going to be viewed? And again, within our, in Asian communities, there's a lot of almost like pride in, showing up as a certain person and having that strong characteristics, and showing vulnerability is seen as a weakness. So I think that's also a reason why.
Yeah, not having lived experience, but having friends and have spoken to people, it is definitely, it feels like it's that kind of, we approach everything with a one size fits all, and it absolutely isn't, and we've got to look at things differently, and it's, intersectionality and looking at the different ethnic backgrounds and how people do behave, and if it is historically that you didn't speak about it, it's working in communities to make sure that people can start talking about it more, and just making as many step changes. And from kind of my side, being allies to people and helping them take that home and, talk about it in your communities to your families, and just, starting to make that change, because we're making it now in the main, but it's just making sure that we're not just going mainstream and it's top level, it's how do we go down and make sure that we can help as many people from different backgrounds as possible.
There's a really good book I read by Ethan Watters, who is a New York Times journalist, called Crazy Like Us. It talks about how America essentially exported its definitions of mental illness so that it could export its cures. And in doing so, so many of the things that were known by different cultures about how to understand and address and treat mental distress were kind of squashed and are only just kind of making their way back into the mainstream. So it sort of speaks to what you were saying, Nikki, that some people just didn't feel they had the capacity to talk about it within the given framework. That brings me to my next question, which is for you. You mentioned having lived experience. I wonder, are you comfortable to share a little bit of your story with us?
So when I was about 18, I didn't actually know at the time, but that's when I first started experiencing depression, and it was only diagnosed till I was about 21, 22. During that time, didn't have the language to know what I was feeling, didn't know how to share it, and then it got to a point where I had to seek medical help because it was disrupting my life in a way that was really unhealthy. And I spent most of my 20s going through that, and as a result, even now till today, I go through, I experience anxiety, but I feel like I've spent the last decade going through different therapies of knowing and learning my mental health in a way, and knowing what works for me. And at the beginning, I just didn't have the language to speak about it, but also being in full-time employment after university. Also, I dropped out of university twice because I was going through this, and when I was in a position to go back, I took myself back and went through that process. But when I went into full-time employment, I was really quite scared to actually speak about it, because I didn't know how to approach my employer to say, this is what I'm going through, because I didn't want to lose my job. I didn't want it to be seen as a weakness or, a weak part of the team where if there were any kind of job cuts at that time, I'd be the first to go. And these are all the things that cross your mind when you're going through that. But luckily along the way, I found some like amazing managers that I've spoken openly about what I'm feeling, what I'm experiencing, and if I'm going through a particular episode, I feel comfortable enough to speak about it. But again, I think not just with the individual, but having experience listening to other of my peers like going through similar things. But as a manager, I think it's really important to know that you do not need to have lived experience to deal with one of your employees that's gone through mental health. And I think empathy is a big part of this. Just providing the tools for your employees to actually approach you with this, and providing that space. And one thing that I've learned along the way is there was a concept that I heard of. It's creating like your user guide. It's actually writing down like the A to Z of what you are, who you are, how you work, and actually sharing that with your manager. And that could like weave into your performance review as well. But essentially, it's just figuring out who you are as a person, how you work, what your triggers are, and if there is something coming up, you're comfortable enough to share it with your peers and with your manager.
There's a guy I know called Ed Kerwin who does this thing called Empathy Week, and he speaks about what empathy actually is, because people think that if they see someone being sad and then they feel sad, that they're being empathetic. But he says, no, that's emotional contagion. Empathy is actually listening and then doing what's right by that person based on the information that they give you. So it's a really important point that you made.
It's not a one-size-fits-all, right? You could have this conversation with your manager and say, hey, I need you to kick my butt. I need you to tell me to, exercise or wake up in the morning, or I need you to give me a mental health day off. It depends. I think once you identify what your needs are and you can communicate them, I think that's a part of the journey into actually almost like acceptance, but creating an environment for you to thrive.
That's, well said. Lorraine, I know that you've got some qualitative data to share with us from NABS relating to the mental health experience of racialised people at work. I was wondering if you could share some of your findings.
Yeah, sure. So some of you might be familiar or not so familiar. NABS did a piece of research last year off the back of the All-In Census. So we took a deep dive on mental health in the industry, and we wanted to have a bit more of an understanding of what's going on for people, because the All-In Census does it as a census level. And we did this research. It was over 1,200 people that took part, and then we had 67 individuals that we spoke to on a focus group level, including MEFA. And what we found is that, for example, All-In Census found that 33% of people were affected by anxiety and stress. But this becomes, even more disproportionate for racialised people. And in our research that we found was that, people are, this may be surprising or completely not surprising, are facing exclusionary behaviours and are working in environments where organisations have done a lot of work in terms of addressing some of their diversity metrics, but internally there isn't that inclusive path for people to take. And diversity initiatives aren't being implemented properly, and that is impacting on people's mental health. People who are more disproportionately affected are therefore less likely to speak up, because of risk to their careers. So the impact and the load on people's mental health that was being expressed in our focus groups and through our surveys was, as a consequence of these types of issues that were happening in the industry. And people were very generous with NABS, we have to say, and we are very grateful for that, because that is helping to shape NABS's work going forward. And we appreciate that people have, perhaps voiced that in the past, but people need to be heard and take action. I think we were talking about this before, isn't there? There is a lot of good, people are taking strides in the awareness area, I think, but turning that into action is where more work needs to be done. So.
Yeah, we were talking about how impatient I am as an activist. I'm like, when's it going to change? We need structural change. I'm aware. But yeah, awareness has its own value. And Sally, Global are launching a big initiative around mental health this month. I wonder if you could just describe what's going to be happening.
So January is all about getting Global talking. So we, as I've mentioned launched the Thrive Network at the back end of last year, and we're working really closely with our people and culture department to kind of further breaking down the taboos and get people talking, so get people feeling like they're comfortable, whether they can reach out to their manager or another colleague, or for people to recognise in someone else that somebody might need to speak. So January has been all about that so far. So we have launched a manager's guide because we recognise that perhaps there are managers that don't feel comfortable still to go and open a conversation with somebody, or might not recognise any of the signs or symptoms. We were talking earlier about how somebody who looks like the most happiest person might be struggling inside, and you might not go and speak to them, but it's, you know, looking for those smaller signs. But also, if they do reach out, being receptive and knowing what to do. You don't yourself have to feel like you need to, you know, have a long chat with them. You can point them in the right direction of the services that we have here available, or services that are other charities outside of the business, or towards NABS for them to talk to somebody who is a professional and who can help them. On Monday we had Brew Monday, which obviously it was Blue Monday, what is known as the toughest day of the year so far, and we've told people, giving them permission to just call a colleague, call a friend, have a meeting, sit together, chat about something that isn't the to-do list, have a brew and a biscuit. We've also voted for Global's favourite biscuit. And we've got this session today, which is going to go out next week for people to watch back and understand a little bit more about what we're doing. And at the end of the month, we're opening up our Thrive page on our Facebook workplace app, so that people can actually give their input into what the mental health strategy is for Global, because we recognise that we're doing as much as we can, but we want to have the input, because then we will get the minorities that don't feel heard, and we can make sure that we're opening and broadening and doing as much as we can to help absolutely every single Globaler in the way that they need to be.
And what is Global's favourite biscuit?
It is a chocolate digestive. Mine would prefer to be a dark chocolate digestive, but I'm sure it's just a milk chocolate.
Nikki, it can be really difficult to set the tone in the correct way for these types of discussions. What do you think, in terms of tips that you could give for anybody who's trying to start a discussion? What should they do and what should they avoid?
Are we talking about as an individual experiencing mental health, or say like a manager who wants to approach somebody?
I think both.
I'm going to just go back to what Lorraine said about the stats on racialised people experiencing mental health. Another thing that came out of the Advertising Association's All-in Census and MEFA Measures is black women, Muslim women and Sikh women are having the most negative experience across Adland, and that's also with their mental health. And I think it goes back to not feeling like you don't belong, feeling like ostracised, especially for those women that have visible, you know, cultural or religious dressings as well. We've all got unconscious bias, right? And there are negative connotations about various different religions and cultures within society. But I think generally, for the most part, I think people are good people, and they, you know, they want to approach people with an inquisitive mindset as opposed to a negative mindset. But I think as an individual stepping into a workplace and experiencing something and wanting to reach out to someone, first, you've got to let your guard down. I think it's really hard, and you know that fear is always going to be there. But I think with anything, you have to like feel the fear and do it. Because if you want to thrive somewhere, or you want to, you know, progress somewhere, it might be that your mental health is going to be a part of you and a part of your journey, and it's going to be a long-term thing. But I think you have to put yourself in a position to get that help, not just medically, but within the work environment. And there's no shame about it. I think you know, we have to be more open to have that conversation. Almost have that water cooler moment, and make it almost like a normal thing to talk about. But as a manager, again, as we've said, we've all got unconscious bias, and you don't have to have lived experiences. But again, I think letting your guard down and not feeling so fearful of having all the right answers as a manager, because you're not going to have the right answers. You can potentially, you know, point someone into the right direction, or you can actually want to be willing to listen and learn and figure out, you know, what the problem is with your employee as well.
I thought it was really interesting what you were saying about how you don't have to necessarily share a culture with someone. And in fact, sometimes it's helpful if you don't. Because it made me think of my anxiety coping mechanism is to overwork. My African father did not pick that up as a bad thing, like, you know, very much, oh good, you're getting all A's, and not kind of recognizing the distress that I was going through all through school. And it actually took somebody from outside of that culture to go, it's not normal what you're doing, and I can see how tired and exhausted you are. So I think that what you say about not letting that being a barrier and not scared of that, I think is really important.
But I think also on a personal level, if you are experiencing a mental health issue and you're looking for a therapist, sometimes finding someone that's a mirror to you doesn't necessarily help. Sometimes you need like a blank canvas, someone that has no lived experience of you, that has no idea what we're going to speak about, and they don't have that cultural nuances to help you through that, because they're actually pinpointing and identifying that from, as we mentioned, like a theoretical perspective, and actually identifying problems that might not necessarily be problems from a cultural perspective. So I think if we use that kind of concept in the workplace as well, that would also help.
Lorraine, sort of piggybacking on what Nikki said a little bit, I know that NABS provides mentoring and coaching. I wanted to focus specifically on the kind of era of hybrid working and the pressure that a lot of people feel to get back into the office and be on site. How can we help people to thrive, within work teams, given that pressure?
Sure, this came up in the research as well, in terms of, I think it's one of those phenomenons that each business is continually trying to crack, and everyone is kind of looking around to each other and going, how do we do this? Because the office disruption of COVID, there was some cultural and societal norms, particularly within advertising as well, that certain ways you did business and certain ways you connected with each other, post office work, drinking, for example, and now as that's changed, evolved, and also people's want for that is continually evolving. Again, with the I suppose, for managers and leaders, that kind of infrastructure has fallen away. So what have they got to kind of cling on to? How can they create that cultural norms in organisations now that they relied on and then defaulted to before? That coupled with, I guess, we know with mental health, there are nuances, there are intersectionalities. It's not an easy task to support people, a whole team, and you've got to take that personal individual approach, coupled with a commercial volatile market. So what do they do? So I think what came through from our research and how you can, and some of the best organisations who were doing well in this, was really working on that open culture, really doing a lot of work, and where people could really, if they choose to, share with their organisations about how they feel, can start to bring themselves and be a bit more open. And that comes down to individual choice, of course, as well. But the key for us in terms of helping to build that culture we saw at NABS was around giving that direct training to managers who are so overlooked. Managers are progressed, they are accidental managers. You're not given that training. So we see, from a NABS point of view, one of our outputs for this year is to develop specific managers training around supporting people in creating that inclusive environment so people can thrive, and taking the nuances of looking at it intersectionally as well.
Sally, what about at Global? What are some of the biggest challenges that we have here, and some successes as well, do you think?
It leads on really from what Lorraine was saying. It's that whole piece where everything's changed culturally. We want to get everybody talking. We're at Global, we've got lots of people that work in offices, but we've got lots of remote people as well. So it's making sure that we can reach everyone and make sure that people know that they can speak out, and that there is a safe space for them wherever they are, whoever they are. And also, again, it's that manager training. There's so many managers coming up who now, through the last 3 or 4 years of the pandemic, haven't been in the office as much, haven't seen how, because you don't always get manager training that teaches you how to talk to somebody and how to be empathetic to somebody and how to look out for signs of somebody struggling. So we need to make sure that there are training programs that people can do that, so that we can, move on and raise the bar, so that all of the managers you know, however long their experiences of being a manager, are able to have that conversation with people. And as I said before, not necessarily then have to go really deep with people, but send them off in the right direction and let them know that that support is there. Where we've had success over the past few years, we have done a series called In Conversation With, where we've had senior members at Global talking openly about their mental health. And that really kind of changed the dial a little bit for people, because they were like, oh, if they can talk about that, then it must be fine for me to talk about it. So people have become more aware of having those conversations. It's a small change and there's still a long way to go, but it's really good that we started that, and that the conversation is now more open and the taboo has dropped. And if people have time off when they're, you know, they need a duvet day, their sickness is mental rather than physical, because you know, everybody has mental health, and it's fine if you have those days where you feel like you can't do something. So we want to be able to measure that, and it be okay for you to say, I'm taking it for my mental health, and it's not because I've got a sore throat or a tummy bug, and just make that normal.
Bad back is the one, isn't it, that people say, apparently. And you've just mentioned that everybody has mental health, and this is something I say all the time, because there used to be this statistic that everybody knew but was actually wrong, which is 1 in 4 people will experience a mental health issue. But it's actually, in any given year, 1 in 4 of us is experiencing a diagnosable mental health issue, so it's slightly different. But my retort to that was always, well, okay, but 4 in 4 people have got a head with their brain in it. And we all need to think about our mental health, and we all need to look after our mental health. I wonder, what do you do to look after your mental health? Lorraine first.
I had 2 really significant deaths about 2 years ago in quick succession. And I think that's the first time that I've really had my mental health impacted as a consequence of that. And so now what I found I have to do, I had to have therapy for quite a while, which is great, and that was provided by NABS. You know, I'm eligible for it as well. I work there, and anyone's eligible for it who works in the industry. And that really shifted and helped me sort of, the talking therapy, and that really helped. And then I really find that exercise goes such a long way in terms of strength training, weights, in addressing any kind of emotions like anger, rage, distress, and then a bit of meditation.
That exercise thing, I really wish I'd learned that earlier, because I think we live in a culture where we're sort of socialised to believe that if you're not brilliant at something, you shouldn't do it. Yeah. And because I'm not a naturally sporty person, I went through the whole of my 20s, the only exercise I did was kind of sporadic Beyonce-inspired booty shaking. That was it. And I got to 30 and I thought, oh, I should probably, because I don't want to die, I should probably do some sort of exercise. And you know, I'm never going to win a medal, but it has its own value. And you're not taught, you know, to do things for their own intrinsic value, are you? Which I think is a shame. What about you, Nikki?
If I'm going through an episode, I've got to a point where I can speak to my manager about it. I think that's the first thing that I need to do for myself, to be like, actually, I'm going through something. I need to step back. I need to take a breather. If it's really bad and I need to speak to someone, then I'll take myself back to therapy, because I think that's the only thing that I feel like that helps me. In addition to, you know, stepping out in nature, taking my dogs for a walk, but I think actually figuring out what helps me, and it's actually speaking to a professional.
What about you, Sally?
I do Beyonce inspired booty shaking weekly, in fact bi-weekly. I'm missing my class tonight to be here, so and I mean, as a child I was a dancer, so I do find that that's like my happy place, and I love music, hence working in the radio industry. But so I go running and I do that. But I talk to my friends. I find that my network of people, if I'm struggling with something, and when there's been life events that happen to you that you're totally out of your control, it just really helps to talk. Because you feel when you turn up like, oh, I'm not going to be able to say anything, and please don't ask me any questions because I know I'm just going to cry. And then you go past that moment and you're suddenly talking, and then in the next few minutes you're laughing, and it's like, it's okay. And everybody has had experiences that impact them in different ways, you know, whether they're minor things or whether they are, you know, more serious things. And I think it is just a case of kind of sharing them and offloading. And someone will be able to talk to you and say something that makes you feel that little bit better.
I really think dark humour goes a long way as
too.
well. Yeah.
No one asked me, but I'm going to tell you anyway. So mine was learning to say no. So I realised that if you don't value yourself, no one else will value you. And I think this is part of being a woman as well, that you're taught that, you know, if you're helpful, then eventually someone will notice and you'll be rewarded. And that's not how the world works, actually. And having boundaries and prioritising work-life balance and having time for yourself, and therefore saying no when you don't have the capacity to take something on. That was something that I had to learn how to do, but I'm so glad that I know how to do it, and so is my mental health.
I have to say though, it's I find it hard. I find it easier to do it in my professional life now, but with my family and my friends, I don't know, I speak to other people about this as well, and they find it easier to push back and say no, you know, in their careers, but actually with family and friends, it's a much harder, longer journey, because again, you don't want to hurt or upset someone, but again, it does help. But then saying no, it's almost like it generates another emotion, and it's having to deal with that as well.
Yeah. A friend of mine said to her mum, I think that we should have more boundaries. And her mum said, boundaries? I birthed you. I was like, okay. So yeah, I hear you. What about I hate the word trends, particularly in relation to mental health, because I think that maybe it diminishes it slightly. But you do see, I think, different emerging patterns in the way that people are experiencing mental health issues. In the workplace, what are you noticing? And I guess we're going to touch on the pandemic and the impact that had on people. Lorraine first.
Yeah, I think we certainly seen, I suppose towards the end of last year, the sort of the load that people have been carrying. I think the global volatility, the continuous nature of the business and the continued change, you know, and that is a part of our business anyway, and then just things that were going on, you know, there is wars happening across the world that are impacting community, certain people, and so there's just a lot of load that people are carrying on an individual level. And so we sort of saw to the end of last year that was just coming to a peak for a lot of people, and I think maybe, you know, so we put on some support for that and developed a bit of our offer for that. But that's, I think, just that there's a continuous build-up from the pandemic, I think, and just the constant volatility that's impacting.
It did make me think, when you said 33% of people are experiencing anxiety, I was like, are 67% of people paying attention?
I mean, I think it's a breakdown of other different types of mental health conditions as opposed to just it's just that one. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, not.
What about you, Nikki? What are you seeing?
I feel like a lot more people are open about sharing their vulnerabilities. Like, we have MEFA Matters or MEFA events, you know, every few months, but meeting members, and it's almost like you say hello and it's like, how are you? And they offload immediately, as opposed to, I think the people that you know, as opposed to before, it would be like, oh, I'm okay, my day's going well. It's, you know, straight into the formalities. Whereas now I'm finding a lot more people are far more comfortable sharing exactly how they're feeling. And sometimes that's what you need. You want to come to an event, you want to meet your friends, and you just want to offload immediately and not have a pushback or not have someone like give you advice. You just want to just let it out. So yeah, I'm seeing a lot more of that.
Is there anything that you have in place if somebody's offloading on you to allow you to put that somewhere?
I think I'm really good at listening. Like, I don't have anything in place, but I'm the friend that is able to sit there and listen and not take it on personally. So I don't have anything in place per se, but I'm able to put up that barrier to, you know, be that friend, but not let it affect my mental health. But I think if it gets to that point, then I have to, you know, say, like, this is too much to carry. Like, what else can I do to help you in a way that I can't actually help you, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it does. What about at Global, Sally? What do you think are the the mental health trends? Ugh.
I think it is that not necessarily saying no when you should. So people doing a lot. There's that whole, the blurred line of work and home life that COVID created because you worked more because you could work through your commute because you were at home because you didn't need to commute. So it's moving people back away from that and making sure that they know that they can switch off. It's not, 24/7 always on. But I think it's that new thing, which is JOMO instead of FOMO, the joy of missing out. I think it's people, we learnt to say, no, we're not going to do that. And, we couldn't do anything for 2 years or not very much. So you did learn that you don't have to fill your diary all the time and you don't have to be busy. And if you don't want to go to that occasion or that event, it's being able to say no. And as Nikki said, also, people are asking, how are you? And they're interested and you're genuinely interested, and then they're, are you really okay? And then people are talking, and I think that is definitely something that we're seeing more and more. I see people, conversations over here, conversations of all the different kind of generations of people here talking, and it feels so much better that people can be honest and open and just talk that much more.
I think that's across the board. It's not just the younger generation.
All generation.
Just to challenge that a little bit, we had in our findings, there was an assumption, I suppose, that we put a hypothesis that there is a generational gap in terms of mental wellness, and that younger people, broadly speaking, are more likely to speak a bit more openly about ill mental health. And actually, the findings aren't what came through in our findings was that actually that's it's not true. Yes, they might be more au fait with like the language and ill mental health conditions and so on, but they're still not feeling safe enough to talk about it. So we've got to be careful not to make an assumption that just because you're younger, you're going to more likely change and challenge the system. You've still got to do the work as an organisation, as managers.
And where there is an assumption that people are more comfortable talking, the people they're talking to also tend to be more dismissive. There's some research that's come out recently about young women. And because the narrative has always been, it's much harder for men to speak about their mental health. When women speak about it, they're often told they're exaggerating, asked if they're on their period, because it's that sort of eye roll of, you talk about it all the time, so obviously it doesn't mean anything. So I think you're absolutely right that that's an unconscious bias note that we all need to have. What role do employers, do you think, have in all this? Because obviously they're going to be key in creating the environment where all of this is possible. I'll start with you. I'll do it differently this time.
I think it's important that it's on the agenda, and now it is, and I think all companies have that responsibility and know that they need to have it on their agenda, that they need to work with their employers to make sure that we're reaching everyone. It's not just one size fits all, and that people feel that they're safe when they're at work if they do need to talk about that, because you don't come to work and leave your mental health at home. You bring it with you. And you've got to find ways, sometimes if you've got classified conditions, of how you can deal with that when you're in the workplace. And hopefully now people feel that when they start in a position or when they're being interviewed, that they can openly say what they might need, and be a lot more honest and open, whether that actually does happen in all cases. But I think it's just that life has moved on and people do recognise that that's the same, in the way that you have to make things accessible for people if they've got a physical disability. Mental health goes in the same way.
Nikki, what do you think employers should be doing more of?
I'm wondering if people are fearful about going back to work because they think there's going to be a breakdown of the culture that we've built over the last few years, a culture of openness. And I'm wondering if that's come across in any of your findings of whether, I know you can't just answer that right now, but I think what we've built over the last few years as an industry of being able to speak about mental health openly, but just any kind of nuances between different communities, I think we need to continue cultivating that so people feel comfortable to continue to share. But also, I think that would really help with a culture of openness, especially like going back to work.
But
That's really interesting.
What we found was that managers and leaders were just defaulting to their personal experiences when they didn't have the frameworks of or how do you change this culture now? Or how do we build this new culture now? The office ways of working have been disrupted. So they would just default to, as we all do as individuals, to point, but we've all got to work harder to actually have a greater understanding of experiences that aren't like your own to make that change. It's important to say though that companies do have a legal requirement, don't they, to support your mental health. There is a health and safety duty, and also as individuals we're protected from day one from discrimination. So there is a legal framework and requirement for companies to make sure that people's mental health are supported, but it's then turning it into some kind of cultural reality, really. So, I guess for us, the key thing was coming through was making sure that it goes to that grassroots and managers are really supporting.
Thank you so much for all of your answers to those questions. I found it really interesting. Hopefully you did too. It's over to you now. It's question time. I am Fiona Bruce. Actually not. No, do any of you, I think we have a roving mic, yes. Do we? Excellent. Do any of you have any questions that you'd like to ask?
Okay. It's a bit intimidating. It feels like an actual microphone. But my question is actually to Natasha, to you. You mentioned that one of your coping mechanisms with anxiety was overworking. Yeah. I am the same. And I come from a culture where 996, like 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week is a thing. So when I overwork, I'm encouraged by my family, friends, and company-wise as well. They wouldn't realize it's something I do as a coping mechanism. It just benefits the company. But I find it really difficult to take a step back and stop that. I always feel awful, but I always find myself overworking constantly. But are there any things you've done personally, any steps you've taken to kind of take a step back on this?
Yeah, well, I can tell you what my therapist told me, and hopefully it's useful. So what no one ever tells you about being the way that we are is that if you're operating at a 10, at some point you'll be operating at a 0. And that might be happening in your personal life. It might be that you go home and you have no energy for anything. You have no energy for your passions and your hobbies or your family and your friends. But my therapist told me to try and be operating between 4 and 7, always. So if 10 is your absolute maximum and 0 is just more asleep, try and aim for between 4 and 7. And then the other thing we did was we divided the day into 3. So that we have morning, afternoon, evening, and to only ever be working 2 of those 3. So if you can do morning and evening, but in the afternoon it's yours, and to be really disciplined about that. But I it's unfortunate because I work with teenagers and their brains are really plastic. So when I'm talking to them about habit change, it only takes them 2 weeks to rewire a neural pathway because they're young and they're lucky to be young. But for people my age, it takes a little while longer. So it does, you'll be going through this process and you will slip up and you'll be like, I've burned out again. But just keep going at it, and eventually it just becomes second nature in my experience.
Hey. I want to ask a question about men.
Okay.
And men's mental
Well,
health.
we're really qualified to answer that.
Lived experience, yeah, you don't have to have lived experience. I don't know the stats, but I do know that there's a rise in suicide rates in men. And I do know, well, from my lived experience, that talking about mental health as a man and also talking about intersectionality and things as a racialized person is even harder, right? Do you think it's a societal change that needs to happen for men to start to open up a bit more, or do you think there's more that could be done, especially in the workplace? Don't know if that's it. I was kind of leaning towards... Sorry, I forgot your name.
It's all right, Lorraine.
Lorraine.
Yeah, I think it's both. I think they've got to go hand in hand. We find at NABS that we don't have a lot of men contact us. Oh, we do, but it's those that share their gender with us. It's women, and it's a really small sample. But when we did our research recently of those that we spoke to who identified as male, they shared that they didn't, and I don't know if this is true for you, but didn't feel that the space around mental health, but maybe more well-being, for example, is a word, wasn't welcoming to men. They didn't feel it was accessible for them. I don't know what, we have to explore a bit more about the barriers on that. But I think there's it's got to go hand in hand. But I certainly think for organisations, they need to be very conscious when we are talking around mental health that it doesn't dominate on certain groups, certain individuals. But there's definitely more that can be done at a societal level and within an organisation.
Can I flip the question to you? What do you think needs to be done in the workplace to cultivate those spaces for men to be able to speak about their mental health?
I think it's what you said, right? It's the openness. So I work in an agency, and there's a lot of DEI events, mental health events, all of the stuff that happens. It's actually so much that it's so hard to keep up with what you're most passionate about and what to do. So, I think the only event that I do see that does tackle men's mental health is International Men's Day, right? Which probably feels a bit niche and siloed, right? Even then, I don't really go to it personally, which I probably should. Probably more leaders in the business that are men that would feel more vulnerable to open up about it. I think that it can start at the top. Not the only thing to do, but starts at the top to help more of the wider company, or the mid-level, junior levels to feel like they can do that.
Yeah, definitely role modelling has a play in that, doesn't it? For sure.
I also I went to see a lecture by a psychologist who was talking about how most men, not all men, but most men have a shame trigger around strength. So we need to redefine what strength is. So rather than going, it's okay, you don't have to be strong all the time, talk about how you feel, what we should be saying instead is, it's strong to talk. And it's strong to support your friend if they need to talk. So it's kind of giving men a definition of strength to aspire to. That's why I was so angry with the way that Prince Harry was treated when he was open about his trauma and how he was dealing with it, how he was treated by the tabloid press, because there was a real opportunity, I felt, that was missed there to go, wow, look at this strong man who's addressing his past and his trauma, and there should be more men like that.
Do you think as well, because in my career, and kind of I look here in the room as well, it's a lot of women that are owning the conversation or owning the networks or owning the spaces. I know with kind of Sally, we need to actually have your co-chair is a man, which is great, but it's something we want to facilitate. And I wonder whether there's something in that, which is almost like the adverse thing of business, that business is set up kind of in a more masculine way, and actually this stuff is set up in a more feminine way. So we're like, yeah, of course, we'll just get in a room and chat, because as women, most women, we're like, yeah, that's great, that feels comfortable for me. But actually, because there aren't as many men leading those things, perhaps that's what we need more of, which is actually the converse, I think, of what we need in business, is more kind of leadership of more feminine attributes in the boardroom, in the kind of meeting and discussion that's more around creativity and all that kind of flow and stuff that's more typically a feminine thing. So I wondered whether that maybe could play a part in it, and something that we need to try and cultivate is actually have men tell us how and be leading it, rather than us trying to, well, we're going to naturally do what feels comfortable for us.
Yeah, 100%. Try to get a seat. You need to come up, mate. That was bang on.
Hi. I think, again, your point you raised around leaders talking about being vulnerable. What struck me was, is there any data which says, because I think the obvious thought is if somebody has got mental health issues, they're underperforming, right? I think that's what most people, if you polled everyone, but I wonder what data there is to show actually that, it's not linked, or actually people who have mental health issues might be in the top quartile of performers.
But then we've got something called high functioning depression, where you wouldn't even know that,
Yeah.
your employees experiencing depression because they're a really high performer.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying, is I think it would be, I'm sure there's some research out there. I think that's the sort of stuff we should be sharing with managers, to go, actually, what you think, what your initial thought is actually, oh God, mental health, it's going to be a problem. Actually, they're actually really good performers. I think that'd be really useful, even if you guys find it, to share it. And, I think especially if you're talking to managers, just getting rid of that bias early, because that's what it is, isn't it?
Thank you. Anyone else? Oh no.
Thank you.
It's an impressive lunge.
I wondered, Lorraine, whether you could cite some examples for us around good practices and some really effective initiatives that have made some big change happen. Where would you point us to sort of think about making change happen, building trust? What have you seen?
Big initiative within the industry. I'm going to be honest, I think I struggle within the industry because I think part of the problem that we've got is that we are very quick at going, here's a new shiny initiative, let's all jump on board and follow that. And then we struggle turning that really into practical application within the workplace, and then the business has moved on. So I think we've got to do that. We do too much shiny new. We don't turn that policy piece into practice. There's some organisations, who can share and have got some really good nuggets, and I think we could probably get better at that across sharing across the business, the industry, because it's a win-win if everyone is supporting, the community's mental health. But I think within our industry, we've got to get better at not moving on so quickly and just really getting down with it and doing the work.
Any other questions? Oh.
Right. So I was going to say, I think in the industry, like you said, there's some initiatives that, I'm aware of, which is I'm Not Okay. And, the massively successful campaign by Calm was absolutely huge. But I think, we've been talking about when you say no, and, Nikki, you just said about high performance. And we also spoke about day one rights, because I think part of the problem is you may have a mental health first aider, but they've only had 1 day of training. And the assumption of how, mental health impacts somebody, because with some of these sort of redundancies and stuff, to Nikki's point about how, people are scared about it, but I think it actually is as well. And what the statistics would be interesting. What I'd be really interested to see is how they have actually looked at people who, potentially have mental illness, and sort of said how they've actually vetted their actual performance versus the assumption of their performance.
Yeah. I definitely think there needs to be more research done into that, because part of good management is understanding how to get the best out of people. And, if you take, I have a diagnosis of an anxiety disorder, and people always say to me, are you not scared? Are you not scared to do live radio? Are you not scared to go to Parliament and tell off a Secretary of State? And I'm like, well, yeah, but I'm also scared of everything. And that's my superpower. Everything is scary to me, so nothing is, And if you understand that about me, then there are real benefits that I can bring to an organisation. But you know my limitations, but you also know my strengths. And I think that's true of absolutely everyone. So I would really like to see that research that you were talking about, is how can we adjust the workplace so that we're getting the best out of people. One example, I had a friend who was diagnosed with clinical depression. He started taking medication. He found it really difficult to get up in the mornings, but he also found it really difficult to go to sleep. And he went to his boss and he said, can I adjust my working hours? And it was such a simple thing. And I thought, wow, yeah, stuff like that really makes all the difference, doesn't it?
It's not really a question, it's more of a thought, and I'm actually kind of stealing this from someone else. This guy called Paul Rowlandson, who, Lorraine, you all know from chats, he's very open about his mental health issues that he's had. And one thing he normally says, and I actually, thinking about it now, I really agree with it, is obviously loads of companies put in place mental health first aiders, which is great that they're thinking of it. But is that not one of the main reasons why people don't talk? Because you're not, is everyone going to feel comfortable going to a colleague? Effectively, I know they've got a mental health first aider hat on, but are you going to feel comfortable really going to a colleague who you may know or you may not know, depending on the size of the business, to discuss what your issues are. So actually, my kind of thing, is it maybe something that as an industry, rather than companies just focus on their own companies, we as going cross-share and we have a industry-wide mental health first aider bank for effect, that maybe you can go to someone else who is actually, doesn't know you, isn't going to see you Monday to Friday in the week and stuff like that. So maybe it was a question.
All NABS.
Yeah. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on that. I mean, I think there's a little bit of misunderstanding about what a mental health first aider actually is and what they do. Is that what it trains you to do is spot the symptoms of when someone's struggling, what to say and what not to say, and then to signpost. So that person isn't supposed to be your go-to of every time I've got a problem, here's who I offload on. That's what a helpline or a therapist or a charity is for. So I do think that mental health first aiders have their place, but the problem comes when businesses take a tick box approach and they go, well, we've trained up a mental health first aider, so job done. You know, there needs to be other support around that kind of backs it up, I think.
I really like the idea of a industry-wide network group, something. There's something in that. I think it's really powerful, and actually there is things that impact this industry that's different from other industries, and actually we'll only be stronger if we work and tackle those things together as well.
There's a small group at the moment of coffee mornings. I was just saying, there is actually, like for advertising, there is a small coffee morning that happens once a month, where a small group of people actually just get together and talk about it. It's only just started, but, you know, and actually there's more men in it than women.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And it's personal preference on whether you want to speak to somebody you know or somebody you don't know, because being a mental health first aider, I've spoken to people, I've had people come to me because they want to speak to me, because they recognise me, know who I am, but I've also had people come who've wanted to speak because they want to talk to somebody that they don't know. And also you get managers or colleagues who are worried about friends coming, and then again it's the signposting, or then you go on to have a conversation with somebody. But I definitely think doing it as an industry-wide thing, because then also you're networking then amongst other businesses and knowing what they're doing in the mental health space there, and sharing experience, and I think that will only help in this space.
In the meantime, before we set up that, we do have the NABS advice line is open to anyone to call. You don't have to be directly affected by a mental health challenge. You might be supporting a colleague, you might be supporting a team member, and you just want to sort of have a sounding board. They can talk to you confidentially. You don't have to give us, any information about yourself if you don't want to, and the information doesn't go back to your organisation. But they're all trained, and they'll give information that's very nuanced to the industry. So it's not like calling an EAP that might be part of your organisation. The team all are very familiar with the industry, the roles, the complexities of the roles, and what goes with that. And so they can tailor the information based on what you share with them. And they'll come at it they apply emotional support skills, and they have got knowledge in workplace employee relations matters. They can inform you of your rights too. And then also you can have access to our other services, like things like one-to-one therapy, coaching, and then we put on workshops on these areas as well. So all really practical interventions. And you can have as little or as much of it as you require through the journey of your career. But that's for you, for your colleagues, for your team, for your managers. So you've got something as well to be able to direct people to.
Any other?
Just on the NABS note, I work in the international side of things, so I'm less familiar with the UK charities, even though my agency is a UK-based one. If I wanted to contact NABS, or if I want to become a member, I have to become a member?
No,
or
it's
how
not
does
a
it
membership.
work?
We're funded by the industry, so lots of organisations will give donations to NABS, but that's not a prerequisite, to you to have to become. It's not a membership. Whether you your company is a donating company or not, you can still use the offer if you work within our industry. So.
Hi. It's a question for you, Nikki, if you don't mind. You mentioned that you've had some fantastic managers who've really supported you over the years, which is amazing. And I think there's a real self-awareness that you show in terms of it, like, this isn't good for me, I need to take a step back. What would your advice be to managers where an individual isn't as aware of what they need when they're going through a mental health challenge, and how that manager can then support the individual?
I think it's going back to feel the fear and do it anyway, and just having that conversation, knowing that you might get pushback from your employee, and they might feel really offended that you've even broached the subject with them, because they might be completely unaware of that they might be experiencing something. But I think the fact that you've gone the length to, you know, extend the olive branch or to offer that help, I think that'll be a big thing, because they might not actually identify what they're feeling until you've actually shed a light to it, and they actually might leave that conversation thinking, actually, this is what I'm going through, and you might have helped them not pinpoint it, but just almost like sow the seed in their mind, and you know, because sometimes you can't see whether you're spiraling or you're going through something. I think sometimes it takes someone else to actually say, look, you need to slow down, or you need to, you know. But again, if you are high functioning, for instance, you might not realise that you're going through something. So I think if you are met with negativity or like pushback, don't take it personally, because you've done your part in terms of like trying to help that individual.
We've touched on it a little bit, but I read some research recently which showed that employees don't really value well-being initiatives as much as they used to. You know, things like subsidised gym memberships or free yoga classes, and what they really want is the real change within the companies on, as we've talked about, the unconscious bias and being their authentic selves in the workplace. So what value should we hold on such initiatives, and should we continue doing those? Because I think I work at Sky, and we always have to look at the opportunity cost of the things that we do, and how is it really, you know, benefiting employees and things. So where's that balance between having those wellbeing initiatives? Because we don't want to really get rid of them, but, you know, we also do want to make sure we're doing the best that we can for our employees.
I have thoughts. So I talk about this a lot, about the education, but I think it applies just as much in workplaces, that what we've done is we've conflated self-care and well-being. And they're both really important, but one's not a substitute for the other. So things like subsidised gym memberships and access to yoga, and quite often in schools they ship in some puppies and everyone plays with the puppies and it's great. But if you are in an environment where day to day it's more pressured than it should be, and people are more stressed than they should be, then it's not going to take the edge off of that. There's a really good book that I read by Andrew Cowley called The Wellbeing Toolkit that talks you through what structural wellbeing is. And it's stuff like having a manageable workload, knowing that there's a clear chain of command. So if I say something to another member of staff, it will be actioned. Having policy in places for colleagues that go through pregnancy loss, colleagues that are going through menopause, bereavement. It's those things actually that are at the heart of wellbeing. And a really good way to find out where you're going wrong with that is to have an anonymous suggestion box where people can say, you know, this is a better way you can support me. So I think there's a pushback against well-being, and I've seen the memes of, like, you know, there's a table of pizzas. It's like, oh, I told my boss I was struggling with my mental health and I got pizza. I've seen that, and the pushback is because that's where it ends. But, you know, the pizza is okay. You just need other stuff as well. Yeah, that's what I think.